officer, he does not have a valid first-class ticket, and he's creating a disturbance for the other guests.
Sir, stand up for me, please. If you don't, you're going to be removed from the aircraft.
I'm in the seat printed on my ticket. It's right here. The ticket's legitimate.
Last chance, sir.
Sarah Collins, flight attendant with employee number 47,821 and 7 years experience at the airline, moved through the first-class cabin and froze when she spotted Michael Reynolds, a black man occupying seat 2A. She confronted him with hostility, claimed he'd stolen another passenger's seat, and insisted on examining his boarding pass using a tone she reserved exclusively for passengers of color. After Reynolds presented his boarding pass, proof he'd spent $1,400 on the first-class ticket, she declared it fake and summoned airport security to forcibly eject him from the plane. Security officer Jake Morrison stepped aboard the aircraft, examined Reynolds's legitimate first-class boarding pass, yet still supported the flight attendant's position, questioning why Reynolds was making a scene and implying the ticket might be counterfeit. Despite numerous passengers confirming Reynolds had been sitting peacefully with a book, Morrison commanded him to rise immediately or be physically dragged out. Then Captain Dennis Hart stepped out from the cockpit and instantly defended his flight attendant, all because Michael Reynolds was black. They had no idea they'd just racially targeted a federal agent with 15 years in counterterrorism work, that their coordinated fabrications about Reynolds causing disruption were being shredded by video footage from several witnesses, and that their choice to eject a black man from first class purely based on skin color would result in a $1.2 million lawsuit, 3 ruined careers, and a viral video hitting 50 million views that would become a textbook example of institutional racism. Before we continue, which city or country are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. We love knowing where our audience is tuning in. If you think purchasing a first-class seat while black shouldn't lead to getting thrown off a plane, hit that like button and subscribe. Michael Reynolds had stepped onto Flight 2847 from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. at 6:45 a.m., 45 minutes ahead of scheduled takeoff. Reynolds, 42 years old, worked as an FBI special agent in the counterterrorism division, heading home after a week-long mission coordinating with field offices throughout the Southeast. His black leather laptop bag held classified briefing documents, explaining why he always chose first class for work-related flights. The seclusion let him examine sensitive materials without nosy onlookers. He'd purchased seat 2A using his personal credit card, $1,400 for the 3-hour journey, since bureau regulations didn't authorize premium seating, even when dealing with top-secret intelligence. Reynolds got comfortable in the window seat, dressed in khakis, a navy polo, and a blazer. He took out his tablet, accessed an encrypted file on emerging domestic terrorism concerns, and started reading. Around him, additional first-class travelers boarded. A businessman in 1A scrolling his phone, an older couple in row 3 settling in, a woman in 2C already dozing with a travel pillow. Reynolds kept his eyes down. Long experience had taught him that being black in luxury spaces frequently attracted unwelcome scrutiny, so he maintained a low profile, stayed professional, and hoped for a trip without incident. Sarah Collins began her pre-departure inspection at 7:15 a.m. After 7 years as a flight attendant, she'd developed a predictable rhythm in the first-class section. She recognized the type of travelers who belonged up front: corporate leaders, affluent retirees, regular flyers she'd seen before. When she arrived at row 2 and noticed Reynolds, she stopped abruptly. A black man in first class, casually dressed, focused on a tablet. Her eyes filled with instant distrust. "Excuse me," Collins said curtly, looming over Reynolds with crossed arms. "May I see your boarding pass?" Reynolds glanced up, mildly caught off guard. He'd faced this question on previous flights, always from attendants who seemed puzzled by his presence in premium seating, though never this early during boarding. "Is something wrong?" he asked in an even tone. "I need to confirm you're in the right seat," Collins stated, her voice carrying an edge that neighboring passengers began noticing. The businessman in 1A looked their direction. The woman in 2C cracked one eye open. Reynolds retrieved his boarding pass from the seat pocket and handed it over without resistance. It plainly displayed seat 2A, first class. Michael Reynolds, confirmation code, paid fare. Collins examined it like she was inspecting counterfeit currency. She flipped it around, held it toward the light, studied the barcode. "Are you certain this ticket is yours?" she eventually asked. Reynolds felt the old familiar pressure in his chest, the awareness that this was unfolding again, that his right to be there was being challenged, that he'd need to justify his presence somewhere he'd paid to occupy. "Yes," he responded steadily. "That's my designated seat. I bought that ticket." "Did you actually pay for first class?" Collins asked deliberately. "Or did you apply an upgrade?" The businessman in 1A shifted awkwardly. "This was getting uncomfortable. I don't understand why that matters," Reynolds said, keeping his tone controlled. "But yes, I paid full price with my credit card." Collins's jaw clenched. "First class is rather costly. I'm simply making sure there hasn't been some booking system error." "There's been no error," Reynolds said with firmness. "I'm seated where I'm assigned with a legitimate paid ticket. Can I return to my reading now?" Collins remained planted. She stood gripping his boarding pass, her mind clearly searching for some angle, some reason why this situation felt wrong to her. Other travelers were paying attention now. The elderly woman in row 3 murmured something to her spouse. A passenger across the aisle pulled out his phone. "Sir," Collins said icily, "I'm going to verify this with the gate agent." "Please remain here. You're holding my boarding pass in your hand," Reynolds said, his patience thinning, though his tone stayed measured. "Everything checks out." "There's nothing that needs verifying. I'll return shortly," Collins announced, pivoting sharply and heading toward the front galley. Reynolds watched her departure, already anticipating where this was headed. He'd experienced variations before the interrogation, the doubt, the presumption that he must have done something dishonest or wrong to be sitting in first class. But this time felt different. This time felt like Collins intended to push further than usual. At the aircraft's front, Collins grabbed the intercom phone and contacted the gate. "This is Sarah, first-class attendant on Flight 2847. There's a passenger in 2A who needs a security check." The gate agent's voice crackled through. "What's the problem?" "I suspect there might be an issue with this ticket," Collins said, dropping her voice, though not low enough to prevent Reynolds from catching fragments of the exchange from his seat. "Does he have a boarding pass?" "Yes, but is it legitimate? Correct name, correct seat, correct flight. Yes, but I have doubts. Sarah, if his boarding pass checks out, I'm unclear what you want us to investigate." Collins bristled. "Just send security. I've got a feeling about this passenger." She disconnected and walked back to Reynolds, who remained calmly seated, still absorbed in his tablet, still doing absolutely nothing improper. "Sir," Collins declared loudly enough for the cabin to hear, "security is coming to confirm your ticket." Reynolds closed his tablet. "Security is coming because I'm sitting in a seat I purchased?" "Security is coming because I've requested confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" Reynolds asked. "You've examined my boarding pass. It's valid." "What precisely requires confirmation?" The woman across the aisle interjected. "This is absurd." He showed his ticket. "Leave the man alone." Collins shot her a sharp look. "Ma'am, this isn't your concern." "It concerns everyone here," the businessman in 1A said. "You're harassing a passenger who obviously has proper documentation. I've been right here. He's done nothing inappropriate." Collins's face flushed red. She wasn't accustomed to passengers challenging her authority, particularly not while defending someone she'd decided didn't belong. "Everyone needs to mind their business," she said forcefully. "Security will sort this out." Reynolds leaned back in his seat, hands visible, manner composed. He understood what was approaching. He knew when security appeared, this situation would either calm down or blow up. He also recognized that multiple passengers were now observing, some filming, all bearing witness to what was rapidly becoming an unmistakable case of racial targeting. The aircraft remained at the gate. The door stood open, and Sarah Collins had just made a choice that would destroy everything. Airport security officer Jake Morrison stepped aboard the plane 3 minutes afterward, his hand already positioned on his belt near his radio. He walked directly to row 2, where Sarah Collins waited with folded arms, looking vindicated that reinforcement had shown up. Morrison had spent 10 years in airport security and had handled hundreds of passenger conflicts, most of them playing out exactly as he expected travelers who refused to follow regulations. "What's happening here?" Morrison asked, addressing Collins rather than Reynolds. Collins jumped in without hesitation. "This passenger won't leave his seat." Morrison turned toward Reynolds with an expression suggesting he'd already concluded who was at fault. "Sir, why are you creating trouble?" he asked, his tone immediately antagonistic. Reynolds looked up at the security officer and maintained a calm, measured voice. "I'm not creating any trouble. I possess a valid first-class boarding pass for this seat. This flight attendant has questioned my right to be here without justification." He reached for his boarding pass, which Collins still clutched, took it from her grasp, and extended it toward Morrison. The security officer accepted it and barely glanced at it for perhaps 2 seconds. The boarding pass unmistakably showed Reynolds's name: Seat 2, A, First Class, Paid Fare, correct flight designation. Everything was proper. "That doesn't give you permission to argue with crew members," Morrison said dismissively, returning the boarding pass. Reynolds felt his jaw tighten but kept his composure intact. "I haven't argued. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. I presented her with my valid ticket. That should have concluded the matter." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You people always claim that," he said flatly. The businessman in 1A drew a sharp breath. The woman across the aisle who'd been filming raised her phone higher to ensure she captured everything on video. Several other passengers adjusted in their seats, visibly disturbed by what they were watching. Collins recognized her opportunity and seized it. "I believe there's been an error with his ticket," she told Morrison. "I don't think he genuinely paid for first class." Morrison nodded as if this validated everything. "Then that settles it," he said. Reynolds stared at them both. "Settles what? You just examined my boarding pass. My name appears on it. My seat assignment is accurate. What error are you referring to?" Morrison stepped closer, his body language becoming more menacing. "Enough to have you removed. Stand up immediately, or this gets physical." The cabin fell completely silent. Passengers abandoned their conversations. A man in row 4 grabbed his phone and began recording. The elderly woman in row 3 clutched her husband's sleeve. Everyone could observe what was transpiring, and everyone recognized it was unjust. Collins pressed her advantage. "He's been disruptive and refusing crew directives," she announced to Morrison and the entire cabin. Reynolds's composure finally fractured. "That's a lie," he said firmly. "I've been sitting quietly reading since boarding. Ask anyone present." Multiple passengers responded immediately. "He hasn't done anything," a woman shouted from row 4. "She's lying," declared the businessman in 1A. "We've witnessed the whole thing," another voice contributed. "He's simply been sitting there." Morrison raised his hand to silence them. "I'm not soliciting passenger input," he said sharply. The woman in 2C who'd been filming held up her phone. "I have video documentation of everything," she said. "He hasn't violated any rules." "He's been in his seat this entire time." Morrison turned toward her with a look that made her recoil. "Lower that phone or you'll be joining him," he threatened. Reynolds couldn't process what he was hearing. "You're disregarding witnesses?" he asked Morrison. "You're ignoring video proof?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Decision's been made. Stand up right now." That's when Captain Dennis Hart emerged from the cockpit, mid-50s with silver hair and a uniform radiating the authority of 30 years in aviation. He entered the first-class cabin and immediately looked toward Collins. "What's the situation back here?" he inquired. Collins turned to the captain like she'd been waiting for support. "This passenger is refusing to follow crew directives," she stated. Hart looked at Reynolds, then Morrison, then back to Collins. He didn't request Reynolds's perspective. He didn't ask to examine the boarding pass. He didn't ask any of the passengers who were actively informing him that Reynolds had committed no offense. He reached his decision entirely based on his flight attendant's account. "Sir," Hart told Reynolds, his voice carrying the weight of ultimate authority, "if my crew member has requested you deplane, I need your compliance." Reynolds felt something cold settle in his core. 3 individuals, the flight attendant, the security officer, and now the captain, had all turned against him without evidence, without inquiry, without even pretending to pursue the truth. "On what basis?" Reynolds asked. "I possess a valid ticket. I've broken no regulations. I've been sitting peacefully in my designated seat." Hart's expression remained unchanged. "Failure to follow crew instructions constitutes grounds for removal." "What instruction have I failed to follow?" Reynolds asked, his voice rising slightly but still controlled. "She requested my boarding pass. I provided it. She asked if I paid for my seat. I answered. Then she summoned security, claiming a problem exists when there is no problem. I haven't refused anything because I haven't received any lawful instruction to refuse." The businessman in 1A rose to his feet. "Captain, I've been sitting directly here the entire time. This gentleman has committed absolutely no wrong. Your flight attendant approached him differently than she approached every white passenger in this cabin. This is racial targeting." The woman still filming spoke up. "I have the entire incident on video. She never demanded anyone else prove they belonged in first class. Only him." Another passenger added their voice. "This is discrimination. We're all witnessing it." "You're about to eject a man for occupying a seat he purchased." Captain Hart raised his voice. "Everyone needs to settle down. This is my aircraft, and I have final authority over who remains and who leaves." Reynolds reached up to the overhead compartment and retrieved his laptop bag. Morrison tensed, his hand moving toward his belt. But Reynolds wasn't reaching for anything dangerous. He was reaching for his FBI credentials. He extracted his badge and identification and held them up for everyone to witness. "I'm Special Agent Michael Reynolds, FBI," he stated clearly. "I'm traveling for official reasons. I purchased this ticket with my personal credit card. I've violated no airline rules or federal regulations. I'm being removed from this flight because your flight attendant made an assumption based on my race. And now both of you are endorsing that discrimination." The color vanished from Sarah Collins's face. Jake Morrison's hand fell away from his belt. Captain Hart stood motionless, staring at the FBI credentials in Reynolds's hand. The first-class cabin went absolutely silent. Sarah Collins stood with her mouth partially open, staring at the FBI badge and identification that Michael Reynolds gripped in his hand. Jake Morrison took a backward step, his earlier aggression dissolving into visible alarm. Captain Dennis Hart's face shifted from confident command to pale shock in approximately 3 seconds. Reynolds kept his credentials elevated so everyone could view them. The badge reflected the cabin lighting. His official FBI identification displayed his photograph, his designation as Special Agent, and his Counterterrorism Division assignment. He allowed the moment to linger. Let them all process what they'd just done. "You're FBI?" Captain Hart finally managed to say, his voice stripped of its previous authority. Reynolds lowered his credentials but kept them visible. "Yes. 15 years with the Bureau, Counterterrorism Division. I've spent the previous week coordinating intelligence operations across 3 states. I'm transporting classified materials in this bag, which explains why I fly first class on official assignments. I require privacy to work. I paid $1,400 for this seat because it's necessary to review sensitive documents without someone peering over my shoulder." Collins attempted to form words, but produced nothing. Her hands trembled slightly. Morrison cleared his throat. "Sir, I wasn't aware you were." Reynolds interrupted him with a look that could freeze water. "You weren't aware because you didn't inquire. You observed a black man in first class and presumed I was the problem. You examined my valid boarding pass and still chose to threaten physical removal. You told me you people always claim that as if I'm some criminal instead of a federal agent who has devoted his career to protecting this nation." The woman in 2C continued recording everything. Her phone remained steady, aimed directly at the scene. At least 5 additional passengers had their phones out now. This was being documented from multiple perspectives. Hart attempted to recover. "Sir, perhaps there's been some confusion. If we could simply—" "There's no confusion," Reynolds said, his voice cold and exact. "Your flight attendant saw me occupying my assigned seat and concluded I didn't belong because of my skin color. She questioned my ticket despite its validity. She questioned whether I paid for first class as though a black man couldn't possibly afford it. She fabricated claims that I was being disruptive when I was sitting quietly reading. She summoned security, alleging a problem with my ticket, when the sole problem was her racism. Collins finally located her voice. I didn't intend, I was simply performing my duties. I wasn't aware you were. Reynolds turned toward her with an expression of complete contempt. Your duties don't include racially profiling paying customers, and my FBI status doesn't alter what you did. It simply means you targeted the wrong individual. He redirected his attention to Morrison. You boarded this plane already treating me like a criminal. You dismissed my valid boarding pass. You disregarded multiple passengers informing you I'd done nothing wrong. You threatened a woman for recording evidence of your bias. You commanded me to stand or face physical removal despite breaking no rules and violating no policies. You were prepared to drag a federal agent off this plane because your colleague made a racist assumption and you supported her without question. Morrison had no reply. He studied the floor. Reynolds turned back to Captain Hart. And you? You exited that cockpit and reached your decision in 5 seconds. You didn't request my perspective. You didn't examine my boarding pass. You didn't listen to passengers telling you this was wrong. You witnessed your white flight attendant accusing a black passenger and automatically sided with her. That's not leadership, that's complicity. Hart opened his mouth, but Reynolds wasn't done. I hold top-secret security clearance. I've served this nation for 15 years. I've worked counter-terrorism cases that have protected lives. I've sat across from actual criminals and genuine threats. And today, I was treated like one because I committed the offense of sitting in first class while black. He paused and looked at all 3 of them. You didn't simply profile a passenger. You profiled a federal agent on official business. This incident is now a federal matter. You'll hear from my attorney. You'll hear from the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, and every single passenger in this cabin witnessed what happened here. The businessman in 1A spoke up. I'm an attorney. I'll provide a complete statement about everything I observed. The woman recording added. I'm uploading this video the moment we touch down. The entire world will see what you people did. Hart made one final attempt. Sir, we can offer compensation, a complete refund. Upgrades on future flights. Reynolds' laugh was harsh and bitter. I don't want a refund. I want accountability. I want policy reforms. I want mandatory bias training for every employee. I want an independent review of how many other passengers you've done this to and escaped consequences. He looked directly at Collins. How many other black passengers have you interrogated? How many complaints have been filed against you that your airline dismissed? Collins's silence provided the answer. Reynolds sat back down in seat 2A. This flight is departing. I'm remaining in my seat. If you attempt to remove me, you'll be forcibly ejecting a federal agent who has violated no laws. Every phone in this cabin is filming. Make your decision. Gate Supervisor Patricia Green boarded the aircraft within 2 minutes of being radioed about a federal agent involved in a passenger incident. With 20 years airline experience, she'd encountered nearly everything. But when she entered first class and saw Captain Hart, Security Officer Morrison, and Flight Attendant Collins, all standing around a seated black man holding FBI credentials while multiple passengers recorded on their phones, she understood this was a career-ending catastrophe. Someone explain what occurred here, Green said, her voice rigid with barely restrained fury. 6 passengers began speaking simultaneously. The businessman handed her his business card and explained he was an attorney willing to provide testimony. The woman in 2C showed her the video she'd captured of the entire confrontation. Another passenger had documented timestamps of everything that transpired. Green watched 30 seconds of the video, and her face went stone cold. She turned to Collins. You're finished. Exit this aircraft immediately and report to my office. Collins's eyes widened. But I was simply attempting to. Get off now, Green interrupted. You've created a federal incident. She looked at Morrison. You're also being reported to your supervisor. Leave. Morrison started protesting, but Green raised one hand. I watched the video. I heard you threaten passengers. I heard what you said to Agent Reynolds. Go. Both Collins and Morrison exited the plane in silence. their careers effectively terminating with each step down the jet bridge. Green turned to Captain Hart. "We'll address your involvement later. Right now, I need you to fly this plane to Washington." Then she faced Reynolds. "Sir, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for what you endured. This is unacceptable, and there will be complete accountability." Reynolds looked at her with zero warmth. "This isn't my first time being questioned on your airline for sitting in first class. It's simply the first time I'm documenting it officially. 3 previous flights over 2 years where flight attendants questioned my seat assignment. It exclusively happens in first class, never in economy, and it never happens to white passengers." Green closed her eyes momentarily. "How many occasions?" 3, Reynolds repeated. "I let it pass because I was exhausted and didn't want confrontation. But today, your employee didn't just question me. She fabricated claims about me being disruptive. She summoned security. She attempted to have me ejected. And your captain and your security officer supported her without evidence or investigation." He pulled out his phone. "I'm filing an official complaint with the Department of Transportation. I'm filing a federal civil rights lawsuit, and I'm requesting a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices at this airline." Green nodded slowly. "I understand. You'll receive complete cooperation from our legal department." "I don't want cooperation," Reynolds said coldly. "I want systemic transformation. I want every complaint filed by minority passengers over the previous 10 years reviewed. I want mandatory anti-discrimination training. I want independent oversight. And I want financial penalties substantial enough that your airline never ignores this problem again." The flight departed 47 minutes behind schedule. By landing time in Washington, the video had been posted to social media. Within 6 hours, it reached 3 million views. Within 24 hours, it hit 15 million. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack was trending nationally. Sarah Collins was terminated within 48 hours for violating company policy and federal civil rights legislation. After 7 years with the airline, she received 0 severance and 0 pension. She was effectively banned from the aviation industry. No other airline would employ her. The video followed her everywhere. Jake Morrison was dismissed from airport security and faced an internal probe for threatening passengers and discriminatory behavior. His personnel file was subpoenaed and exposed 6 prior complaints from minority travelers that had been dismissed without investigation. Captain Dennis Hart was suspended pending investigation and ultimately demoted, stripped of his captain rank and reassigned to ground training responsibilities. His 30-year career concluded not with retirement celebrations but with disgrace. The airline's legal team examined Reynolds's complaint and uncovered a devastating pattern. Over 7 years, 47 formal complaints had been submitted by black passengers alleging discrimination in seating, service, and treatment. 45 of those complaints had been dismissed by HR as misunderstandings or oversensitivity. Internal communications revealed that supervisors had been warned about Collins specifically but took no action because she was efficient and passengers rarely complained twice. Reynolds filed a federal lawsuit seeking $1.2 million in damages. The airline settled within 4 months rather than risk a jury trial. The video evidence was too damaging. The pattern of ignored complaints was too obvious, the potential publicity too destructive. The settlement included mandatory anti-bias training for all flight crews, independent quarterly reviews of passenger complaints, a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling, and the establishment of a passenger advocacy office. 23 employees, with patterns of discrimination complaints, were forced to resign. 5 years afterward, the video had 50 million views and was featured in corporate training seminars worldwide as a case study in the price of racism. Reynolds used his settlement funds to establish a foundation supporting victims of travel discrimination and consulted with airlines on civil rights compliance. Sarah Collins was 38 when she lost her job. She never worked in aviation again. She accepted a retail position earning $14 an hour. The video never stopped haunting her. Michael Reynolds continued his FBI career and retired after 25 years of service. He still flies first class. Airlines treat him with exceptional care now, terrified of becoming the next viral discrimination incident. The lesson was costly and public. Assumptions about who belongs where based on skin color don't merely hurt individuals. They obliterate careers, cost millions, and expose the systemic failures that permitted discrimination to flourish unchecked for years. If you believe qualified professionals deserve respect regardless of race, share this story. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere you paid to be, share your experience in the comments. And if you think billion-dollar corporations should face genuine consequences for tolerating racism, subscribe, because we're delivering more stories where justice costs exactly what it should: everything.